The western frontier was a place of dust, danger, and divided loyalties. Settlers carved small homes into the wilderness, always bracing for raids, drought, or the harsh hand of fate. Among them was Mary Whitfield, a 22-year-old nurse, who had come west not for gold or land but for healing. She worked in a small army fort, tending to weary soldiers and the occasional settler who came in bleeding after a skirmish. Her hands had stitched wounds, her eyes had seen death, but nothing prepared her for the day her life would be torn from its familiar path. It began with the thunder of hooves. The Apache warriors descended at dawn, their war cries echoing through the valley. The fort had been warned of trouble, but warnings were too late for the handful of soldiers and civilians within. The battle was swift, fierce, and bloody. Mary ran to the wounded, pressing cloth against bullet holes, begging the men to hold on. She never saw the warrior who grabbed her from behind until it was too late. A rough hand covered her mouth, and in a heartbeat, she was pulled from the safety of her patients and into the chaos of captivity. The journey into Apache territory was a blur of fear. Bound to the back of a horse, she felt the relentless sun scorch her skin, the dry wind steal her strength. She had heard the stories, whispered tales of what captives endured at the hands of warriors. Yet oddly, she was not treated with the cruelty she expected. Her captors neither mocked her nor struck her. They were silent, watchful, as though waiting to see what kind of woman she was. When at last they entered the Apache camp, Mary's heart nearly gave out. The village stretched across the desert like an alien world. Tall, lean men sharpening weapons, children darting between huts, women grinding corn with strong arms. Eyes followed her every step, some filled with curiosity, others with suspicion. She was led to the medicine woman, an elder whose face bore a map of time and hardship. After a long silence, the woman touched Mary's hands and nodded slowly. The message was clear. Mary would not be killed. She would be put to work. The tribe soon discovered her skill with bandages, herbs, and steady hands, though she lacked. Their knowledge of desert plants, her training allowed her to sew wounds and stop bleeding in ways they had never seen. At first, the warriors resisted her presence. Who was this pale stranger to lay her hands on proud Apache men? But when her work saved the arm of a young warrior who would otherwise have lost it, grudging respect began to grow. Still, Mary remained an outsider. Nights were the hardest, when the campfires glowed and laughter filled the air, yet she sat, alone, clutching memories of home. Her heart ached for freedom, but she understood the truth. Survival depended on obedience. If she refused to serve, death would come quickly. Her fate seemed sealed, an unwilling prisoner made into a healer for a people not her own. Yet beneath her fear, a strange curiosity stirred. She watched how the tribe moved with the rhythm of the land, how even the fiercest warriors treated their elders with reverence, how women laughed together despite hardship. Slowly, she realized they were not the savages she had been taught to fear. They were human, proud, protective, and deeply loyal to their own. But then came the day that changed everything. A raid left one of their most feared warriors gravely injured. He was carried into the camp, blood streaming down his body, his face grim as death. Whispers spread quickly through the village. Taza, the fiercest Apache, had been wounded. No one dared approach him, not even the medicine woman. His temper was infamous, his pride greater than the mountains themselves. Yet the elders made a startling decree. Mary, the captive nurse, would tend to him. The order sent chills down her spine. She had been in the camp long enough to know who Taza was, the man children feared, the warrior whose name soldiers cursed before battle. If she failed him, she would die. If she angered him, she would suffer. And if she touched him, well, no woman, not even an Apache, had ever been so close. For Mary Whitfield, her captivity was no longer about survival. It was about stepping into the fire of danger itself and facing the fiercest man she had ever known. His name carried more weight than a rifle or a war drum. Taza, the fiercest Apache warrior, was not just a man among his people. He was legend, fear, and fire all in one. From the day of his youth, Taza's life had been shaped by war. He was born in a season of blood, when soldiers pushed deeper into Apache land and battles flared like prairie fires. His father, a respected warrior, had been killed by cavalry when Taza was still a boy. His mother died soon after, leaving him, an orphan with nothing but the hard desert sun above and the cold stars at night. Some said that grief carved his soul into stone. Others claimed the spirits had chosen him to walk a path no ordinary man could bear. Whatever the truth, Taza grew, with violence as his teacher. He became a master of horse and bow, his accuracy unshaken even in the chaos of battle. His knife was said to be quicker than the strike of a rattlesnake, his strength able to topple men twice his size. Soldiers whispered about him in fear, calling him the Ghost Rider, because no bullet seemed able to bring him down. But it was not just his skill in battle that made him feared, it was his silence. Taza spoke little, smiled never, and trusted no one outside his people. He carried himself like a man who had already lived through 10 lifetimes of pain. Where other warriors drank and laughed by the fire, he sat apart, sharpening his blade, eyes fixed on some horizon only he could see. The scars on his body told the story his lips would not. Long, jagged lines across his chest and arms, a deep mark along his ribs, the healed wound of a bullet near his shoulder. Each scar was not just survival, but a declaration. He could not be broken. Many had tried. None had succeeded. Among the Apache, Taza's reputation was both pride and burden. Young warriors sought his approval, yet trembled under his gaze. Elders respected him, yet worried his thirst for vengeance burned too hot. He fought not just to protect his people, but to punish those who had wronged them. Mercy was a stranger to him, and that made him both a hero and a danger. To outsiders, settlers, soldiers, travelers through the frontier, Taza was a nightmare given flesh. Mothers warned their children not to wander, lest the fiercest Apache snatch them away. Soldiers cursed his name after raids, swearing they would kill him if ever they had the chance, but they never did. Taza always vanished into the desert, leaving nothing but dust and silence behind. Yet for all his fury there were whispers that beneath his hardened shell lay a man who had suffered too much, too early. Some believed he carried a wound deeper than flesh, a wound no medicine woman could heal. Others thought his silence was not rage, but grief so heavy he dared not give it words. Still, no one dared to ask. When the raid left him injured, the camp grew restless. A warrior like Taza was not supposed to fall. To see him carried into the village, blood soaking his chest, his body weak, was like watching a mountain crumble. Men exchanged anxious looks, women whispered prayers, children stared wide-eyed. The medicine woman approached, but even she hesitated. Taza's eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, flashed with warning. He would not allow weakness to be witnessed. To touch him without his permission was to risk death itself, and yet something had to be done. That was when the elders made their decision. If anyone could tend to him without fear, it would not be one of their own. It would be the white nurse, the outsider woman they had captured, the one who had already proved her skill in healing. If she failed, nothing was lost. If she succeeded, the fiercest Apache might live to fight again. The order rippled through the camp like lightning. Warriors muttered in disbelief. Women shook their heads. A white woman to touch Taza? It was unthinkable. No other eyes had ever dared to see him stripped of his armor of pride and fury. And yet, the elders had spoken. For Taza, it was a cruel insult to his pride. To be tended by an enemy, a woman no less, was a humiliation sharper than any blade. But he was too weak to resist. His body lay still, though his eyes burned like fire, daring her to try. And for Mary, the captive nurse, it was a summons into a storm she might never escape. She would be the first to see the warrior as no one else had ever seen him. Not as a legend, not as a nightmare, but as a wounded man. The Apache camp fell into a tense silence the moment the elders gave their decree. The white woman will bathe him. The words hung heavy in the air. For the people, it was more than an order. It was a gamble with fate. For Mary Whitfield it was a death sentence wrapped in duty. She had seen Taza only once before from a distance when he had returned triumphant from battle. He was a towering presence, his shoulders broad as an oak trunk, his face set in stone, his eyes like fire embers, burning in a storm. Even among warriors he stood apart. The others bowed their heads in respect. Some even stepped aside when he passed. And now that same man, the fiercest Apache of them all, lay wounded in a lodge, his pride broken, his body weakened by blood loss. The medicine woman explained little, only that his wounds needed cleansing, and the stranger's hands would do what no Apache dared. Taza would never allow his people to see him in such a state. They could not strip the dust and blood from his body without dishonoring him. But the white woman, an outsider, mattered little. If she died in the attempt, her loss was no loss at all. Mary's throat tightened as she listened. To touch him was dangerous enough. But to bathe him, to remove the dirt, the blood, perhaps even the coverings he wore, was something no woman had ever dared. She knew what such a task meant. Her eyes would fall where no eyes had been allowed, and her hands would go where none had touched. It was a violation of his pride, and men like Taza did not forgive such trespass lightly. The first step into his lodge was like stepping into a lion's den. The air was thick with the sharp tang of blood and herbs. Shadows flickered on the walls from a single flame, and there he lay, Taza, fierce even in weakness. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his skin glistening with sweat, his gaze sharp despite the wound tearing at his side. When their eyes met, Mary's heart nearly stopped. His glare was not one of helplessness, but of warning. Come closer, and you may not leave alive. Her hands trembled as she set down the basin of warm water, cloths, and herbs. She forced herself to speak, though her voice quivered. I am only here to help you. He did not answer. His silence was more dangerous than words. With careful movements, she dipped the cloth into the water, wrung it out, and knelt beside him. The first touch was electric. The cloth brushed his chest, wiping away dried blood and sand, and his muscles tightened like coiled steel. She expected him to lash out, to strike her across the face, but he remained still, watching her every move, with eyes as sharp as daggers. Mary's fear battled her resolve. She was no stranger to bathing wounded soldiers back at the fort. But this was no soldier. This was Taza. Each stroke of the cloth felt like walking a tightrope above death. Yet as she worked, something unexpected began to unfold. The scars across his body told her stories without words, stories of battles long fought, of pain endured, of survival beyond reason. A jagged line across his ribs spoke of a blade that had nearly ended him. A puckered mark near his shoulder revealed where a bullet had torn through flesh and bone. She had seen wounds before, but never such a map of suffering etched into a man's skin. Her hand steadied as she continued. Somewhere between fear and duty, she found a rhythm. Cleanse, rinse, press gently, move on. She dared not look up too often, but each time she did, his eyes were on her, unblinking. At last she reached the worst of his wounds, the gash along his side. She pressed the cloth carefully, washing away clotted blood, whispering softly as though her words could calm the storm in his soul. To her surprise, he did not resist. Perhaps he sensed her sincerity, or perhaps the exhaustion of battle finally weighed heavier than his pride. By the time she finished, the basin water was dark, her cloth stained, and her heart pounding. She had done what no one else dared. She had bathed the fiercest Apache. And though her life still hung by a thread, something had shifted. For Taza, it was not just his body that had been touched. It was the iron walls of his pride. For Mary, it was not just the task of survival. It was the beginning of seeing him not as legend, but as man. Outside, the camp waited with bated breath. None dared enter, none dared ask. They would only learn later that the impossible had been done. The fiercest Apache had allowed the touch of a white woman, and the world had not shattered. Though perhaps, deep within, something else had begun to crack. The desert nights had always been cold, But Mary Whitfield felt a different kind of chill the evening after she was ordered to bathe the fiercest Apache. Her body was weary, her hands raw from scrubbing away blood and sand, but it wasn't the labor that left her trembling. It was the memory of his eyes, the way Taza had stared at her, a mixture of fury, pain, and something unspoken. No words had passed between them, yet she knew she had walked on the edge of death and survived. But survival was not guaranteed a second time. The following morning, she was sent again to tend to him. The medicine woman pressed a bundle of herbs into her hands and gestured toward the lodge. Cleanse him, pack the wound, keep him alive. The tone carried no warmth, only expectation. If she failed, she would not be forgiven. Mary's steps felt heavy as she approached. She reminded herself that she had tended many wounded men before, soldiers whose bodies had been broken by war. Yet none of them had been like this. None had carried such raw power, even in weakness. When she entered, the air inside was sharp with the smell of sweat, blood, and bitter herbs. Taza sat upright this time, his back against a blanket-draped frame, his chest bare. His wound was still angry and red, but it was his eyes that stopped her breath. He was waiting for her, not with gratitude, not with relief, but with the unyielding intensity of a predator studying its prey. Mary swallowed her fear and knelt beside him, arranging her things. Her hands trembled as she reached for the cloth. Before she could touch him, his voice came, deep and rough like stone grinding against stone. "You are afraid." It was the first time he had spoken to her. His English was accented but clear. Mary's had snapped up, startled. She wanted to deny it, to show strength, but the truth was written in her shaking fingers. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am afraid, but I will not fail you." His eyes narrowed, studying her as though trying to unravel her soul. Then he leaned slightly closer, his breath warm, his presence suffocating. "Many men have feared me," he said. "They ran, they begged, but you stay." The cloth in her hand was damp, her knuckles white from gripping it. She met his gaze, refusing to look away. "Because I must. Fear does not excuse me from duty." It was a dangerous thing to say. Any sign of defiance could have been her undoing. Yet to her, surprise, his lips curved ever so slightly, not into a smile, but into something like acknowledgement. Perhaps respect. When she pressed the cloth to his wound, he did not flinch, though she knew it must have burned like fire. His body was iron beneath her touch, muscles tightening with every movement. The silence between them stretched taut, filled, with tension neither could deny. Her fear had not vanished, but with each touch, courage seeped into her veins. She realized then that Taza was testing her. Every glare, every silence, every heartbeat was a trial. If she broke, he would despise her. If she endured, he might allow her closer. As she finished cleaning the wound, she said quietly, "I have seen many men broken by pain. You are not one of them. But even the strongest must allow help, or the wound will claim them." For a moment his jaw tightened, as though her words had cut deeper than the wound itself. Then he spoke again, softer, but with an edge of command. "Do not think I am weak because you touch me. I allow it only because death would take me if I refuse." Mary nodded. "And I only touch you because life demands it." It was the first exchange of equals they had shared, though neither would admit it aloud. By the time she packed the herbs into his side and wrapped the wound with fresh cloth, her fear had shifted. It had not disappeared, but it had transformed. No longer the terror of prey before a predator, but the wary respect of one spirit facing another. When she stood to leave, he caught her wrist, not harshly, but firmly. Her heart leapt into her throat. "You defy fear," he said, eyes locked on hers. "But remember, defiance is dangerous." She pulled her hand free, her voice low but steady. "So is silence." His eyes flickered, as if she had struck a hidden chord within him. For the first time he said nothing, and as Mary stepped into The open air, her chest heaving, she realized something had shifted between them. Fear had not vanished, but defiance had planted its seed. Mary had tended to many wounds in her life, but never had she seen a body like Taza's. Every inch of him told a story, not through words, but through scars. When she returned to his lodge again, basin in hand, he was already waiting for her. He did not speak, but his silence was heavier than iron. She tried not to stare, yet as the cloth touched his chest, her eyes could not help but follow the lines etched into his skin. The first scar ran diagonally across his collarbone. Jagged, uneven like lightning had struck him. She traced it gently with the cloth, and though she said nothing, her mind filled the silence. A knife wound, perhaps from a close fight. Farther down, a cluster of marks dotted his ribs, puckered holes where bullets had once torn through him. He should not have survived such wounds, and yet here he was, breathing steady, his eyes sharp as ever. Another scar stretched across his abdomen, a long, thin line that had healed poorly. The kind of wound that could only have come from a saber or bayonet. She swallowed hard, realizing he had faced not just skirmishes but wars that would have killed ordinary men. And still, there were more. His arms bore circular burns, his back faint lash marks that she dared not ask about. It was as though the desert itself had carved him into something indestructible. Mary's hands slowed as she worked. She was no longer cleansing wounds. She was reading the story of his life. Every scar was a memory written on flesh, and she felt as though she were trespassing into a history no one else had dared to witness. Her voice broke the silence at last. "You should not be alive." Taza's eyes shifted to her, unreadable. "Yet I am." She hesitated, then asked softly, "How many battles have you survived?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a voice as dry as the desert wind, he answered, "Too many. Enough to know that scars are not marks of pride, but of debts unpaid. Each one is a spirit I carry with me. The men who fell, the blood spilled, they remind me that I have no right to rest." The words struck her deeply. Soldiers she had tended to back at the fort often bragged of their scars, wearing them as badges of honor, but Taza spoke of his as burdens, weights he could never cast off. "You see wounds," he continued, his tone sharp, "but I see ghosts, and ghosts do not let a man sleep." Mary wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but the weight of his words silenced her. She pressed the cloth to his shoulder, feeling the heat of his skin beneath her hand, and wondered how a man could carry so much pain and still stand so tall. When she finally leaned back, the basin water was dark once more, her heart heavy. She had been ordered to bathe the fiercest Apache, but instead she had glimpsed the soul of a man who had given more of himself to war than anybody should. And though she did not speak it, she felt an ache in her chest. For the first time, she did not see him as a captor or a legend, but as a man, one scar away from breaking. The days passed in uneasy rhythm. Each morning, Mary entered the lodge with basin and cloth, and each time, Taza allowed her closer. Their exchanges were brief, often no more than a sentence, sometimes nothing at all. Yet silence, she soon realized, carried more weight than words. At first, she thought he tolerated her only because he had no choice. But slowly, she began to notice changes. His eyes, once sharp with suspicion, lingered on her longer. When her hand brushed his arm as she worked, he no longer stiffened. His breathing, once shallow with restraint, grew steadier in her presence. It was in the silences that something unspoken took root. One evening, as she bathed the dust from his chest, the camp outside roared with laughter and song. Warriors celebrated a victory, their voices rising into the night. Mary expected Taza to ignore it, as he always did, but instead he spoke softly. "They sing for the dead," he said. She looked at him, surprised he had offered the explanation. "For the dead?" "For their spirits. Victory means little. The dead must be honored," she nodded slowly. It was the most he had shared with her, and though his voice was rough, she heard the reverence in it. Another day, as she pressed herbs into his wound, he asked her, "Why do you heal men who kill your people?" The question startled her, but she answered truthfully, "Because pain is the same in every man. A wound does not ask who you are before it bleeds." He studied her in silence, and though he said nothing, she felt a shift in the air. For the first time, she sensed that he saw her not only as a prisoner, but as a woman who had chosen compassion, even when it made her vulnerable. There were moments when his silence softened and she felt almost safe. Once, as she wrung out the cloth, it slipped from her hand. She cursed under her breath, flustered. To her shock, the faintest sound, something like a short, dry laugh, escaped his lips. She looked at him wide-eyed, and for a heartbeat, the fiercest Apache looked almost human. But just as quickly, the mask returned. His face hardened, his voice low. "Do not mistake me for gentle." Mary lowered her gaze, but inside she carried the moment like a hidden flame. Each time she left his lodge, she felt changed. She could not explain it, but there was a thread connecting them now, woven not from words but from trust born in silence. He had allowed her to touch his scars, to witness his pain, and though no vow had been spoken, it was a bond stronger than any chain. For Taza, it was the first time in years that another had looked at him without fear or reverence but with steady resolve. For Mary, it was the first time she had tended to a man who did not simply receive her help, but challenged her spirit at every turn. And so, though the camp still saw her as nothing more than a captive, and though she reminded herself daily that he was her captor, not her ally, Mary knew the truth. Between them, a silent understanding had begun to grow. It was dangerous, it was forbidden, and it was unstoppable. The Apache camp was never quiet for long. By day, children laughed as they played. Warriors sharpened their weapons and women pounded corn into meal. By night, the air filled with drums, stories, and the scent of fires. Yet, beneath the daily rhythm, unease grew. It began as whispers and soon became open talk. Why does Taza allow the white woman so near? Mary could feel the eyes on her whenever she crossed the camp carrying her basin of water or bundles of herbs. Women paused in their work to stare, their expressions unreadable. Warriors muttered in low tones, glancing at her and then toward Taza's lodge. Even the children sensed the tension, their games halting when she passed. Among the warriors, suspicion burned brightest. To them, Taza was more than a man. He was their fiercest shield, their living legend. If his spirit was weakened, the whole tribe would suffer. They feared that Mary's presence was not just unwanted, but dangerous. One evening, as Mary finished tending to Taza, she stepped outside to empty the soiled water. A group of warriors stood nearby, their faces grim. One stepped forward, his voice hard as flint. "She touches what no woman should touch. She sees what no eyes should see. This is wrong." Mary froze, clutching the basin, unsure whether to defend herself or retreat. The medicine woman appeared then, her presence commanding. She raised her hand. The elders gave their word. The white woman heals him. Without her, Taza dies. Do you wish to lose him? The warriors fell silent, though their eyes still burned with anger. They could not deny the truth. Taza's life was worth more than their pride, but the conflict did not end there. Whispers turned sharper like knives. Some claimed Mary was casting spells on him, twisting his mind with foreign magic. Others said she had cursed him, binding his spirit so he could no longer fight as before. A few even muttered that her death would break whatever hold she had. Inside the lodge, Taza was not blind to the unrest. He listened to the murmurs, the sidelong glances, the way his people shifted uneasily when the nurse walked by. He knew they doubted him for the first time in his life. One night, as Mary pressed herbs into his wound, he spoke without looking at her. "They want you gone." She paused, her hand hovering over his skin. "I know. They fear you weaken me." Mary's lips tightened. "Do I?" His dark eyes finally met hers, sharp as arrows. "No, The single word carried more weight than any explanation. Still, the conflict grew. Warriors began challenging Taza's decisions, questioning his judgment, something that had never happened before. The tribe was restless, and Mary knew that at any moment their suspicion might turn violent. The tension boiled over one evening when a young warrior, bold with anger, stormed into the lodge. His eyes blazed as he pointed at Mary. "Send her away. She is poison. She makes you less than what you are." Mary froze, her heart racing. But before she could move, Taza rose from his bedding with surprising strength. His voice was thunder in the confined space. "Leave." The warrior hesitated, but Taza's glare was enough. He retreated, his pride wounded, but his message delivered. When the lodge grew quiet again, Mary whispered, "They will not stop." Taza's jaw tightened. "Then let them try." It was the first time Mary realized the danger was no longer hers alone. By allowing her near, Taza had defied his people as much as she had defied her fear. And now, both their fates were tangled, in the storm building within the camp. The storm arrived sooner than anyone expected. At dawn, the camp stirred with shouts. A rival tribe had attacked, swift and merciless, slipping through the canyons like shadows. Arrows rained, fires spread, and chaos consumed the village. Women screamed, children ran for shelter, and warriors scrambled to defend their homes. Mary, carrying fresh water for Taza, froze as the first arrow struck the ground near her feet. Panic surged, but before she could run, she heard the sound of a struggle within the lodge. She rushed inside and found Taza on his feet, swaying but armed with a knife. His wound had not fully healed, yet his pride would not allow him to hide while his people fought. "You cannot fight," she cried, trying to push him back onto the bedding. His voice was sharp, his fury unshaken. "I am Apache. I will not watch others die while I sit." Before she could argue, a rival warrior burst through the flap, weapon raised. Mary screamed, but Taza struck with lightning speed, driving his blade into the man's chest. The attacker fell, but not before his knife slashed across Taza's side, reopening the wound. Blood poured down his body and his knees buckled. Without thinking, Mary threw herself beneath his arm, dragging him toward the back of the lodge. He resisted at first, his pride burning, but his strength was fading too quickly. "Do not be a fool," she hissed. "You'll die here." Through the smoke and chaos, she pulled him outside, weaving through the burning camp. Warriors clashed around them, steel against steel, cries of rage filling the air. Twice arrows nearly struck them. Once, a rival warrior lunged and Mary swung the basin she still clutched, striking him hard enough for Taza to finish the man with his knife. Every step was a battle, every breath a prayer. Mary had never known such terror, but she would not let him fall. Not here. Not like this. At last she found a crevice near the rocks beyond the village, hidden from sight. She lowered him gently to the ground, her hands shaking. His face was pale, his breath ragged, but his eyes still burned with fire. "You saved me," he said hoarsely. Mary pressed her hands to his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "No, I kept you alive. You will save yourself." His gaze lingered on her, unreadable. For the first time, he seemed to truly see her, not as a prisoner, not as a healer, but as a woman who had risked everything for him. When the battle ended and the tribe regrouped, Taza returned to the camp alive only because of her. And though no one spoke it aloud, the truth rippled through the people like wind over the sand. The fiercest Apache owed his life to the white woman. It was a bond no blade could sever, and a debt no tribe could ignore. In the days after the raid, the Apache camp lived in uneasy calm. Fires smoldered in the blackened earth, broken arrows littered the sand, and the wounded were tended with herbs and whispers of prayer. But the true wound of the battle was not one the people could see. It was in the eyes of their fiercest warrior. Taza lived, but he lived because of Mary. That truth gnawed at the tribe. A warrior should owe his survival to no one, least of all an outsider, a white woman. Whispers grew sharper. Some spoke of curses, some of betrayal, and some warned that Taza's spirit had been stolen by her touch. Mary felt the weight of those, stairs, but she could not bring herself to leave his side. She had dragged him through fire and smoke, pressed her hands against his wound until her fingers were raw, and begged life itself to spare him. Since that day, she could not untangle herself from him. Every morning she tended his injuries, her fingers brushing against the hardened planes of his skin, her eyes meeting his in silence that spoke more than words. It was dangerous. She knew it. His people resented her more than ever. The medicine. Woman watched with unreadable eyes. Warriors muttered in the shadows, and even the children whispered as she passed. But when she looked at Taza, when she saw the way his gaze softened, not much but enough, she could not turn away. One night, as the camp grew still, Mary sat in his lodge, her hands resting on her lap after changing his bandages. The firelight flickered over his scars, casting him half in shadow, half in gold. She found herself whispering words she had kept locked away. "Do you ever grow weary of fighting?" Taza looked at her, silent for a long time. Then he answered, his voice low. "A man who lives by the blade does not ask for rest, but—" He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he weighed the risk of speaking further. "Sometimes I wonder if peace exists. Not for my people, not for myself." Mary's heart ached. "Peace can exist," she said softly. "I've seen it. In laughter and a kind hand in quiet moments. Even here." Their eyes met. The silence between them deepened, heavy but not hostile. Something unspeakable flickered there. Recognition, longing, perhaps even hunger. Taza shifted, his voice hoarse. "You should fear me." Mary did not flinch. "I did, but not anymore." Her words struck him like an arrow. He leaned closer, his hand brushing hers, rough and warm. For a heartbeat, the fiercest Apache was not a legend, not a terror, not even a warrior. He was simply a man, one who carried scars, one who longed for something more than survival. Their closeness was a secret, hidden behind lodge walls, spoken in whispers and stolen glances. To the camp, they remained captor and captive. But in the quiet, forbidden hours, they were something else entirely. It was dangerous, more dangerous than any battle. A love between them could never be sanctioned, never spoken of openly. It threatened everything. Her fragile place in the camp, his authority as a warrior, the very trust of his people. Yet both knew that the more they tried to deny it, the stronger it burned. For Mary, it was a love she never expected, to see the humanity behind the fiercest face of war. For Taza, it was a dangerous surrender, to let himself be touched not just in body but in soul. And though neither dared to say the word aloud, both knew it. Their affection was forbidden, which meant it was the truest kind of all. The time for choice came sooner than either of them expected. Word spread that soldiers were approaching the valley. Scouts had seen their banners in the distance, their rifles glinting under the sun. The Apache camp braced itself for another clash, sharpening arrows, preparing horses, gathering supplies for flight if needed. But for Mary, the news carried a different weight. The soldiers were her people. If they found her, she would be rescued, or so they would think. But would she still belong to them? Could she return to the fort after all she had seen, after all she had felt? For Taza, the threat was more than battle. The soldiers were a reminder of every scar, every ghost that haunted him. To fight again meant more blood on his hands, more spirits to carry. But if he did not fight, his people would see him as weakened, perhaps even broken. The tension grew unbearable. Whispers about Mary sharpened into threats. Some warriors argued she should be handed over to the soldiers as a sign of strength. Others demanded she be killed to break whatever hold she had on Taza. The night before the soldiers were expected to arrive, the elders gathered. Before the entire camp, they placed the choice at Taza's feet. "You live because of her," the eldest said. "You allow her near, and our people doubt you. Now the white soldiers come. Decide. Keep her, and you lose the tribe's trust. Release her, and you keep your honor. All eyes turned to Taza. Mary stood at the edge of the circle, her heart pounding. She knew what the tribe expected. She knew what honor demanded. And yet, deep down, she hoped he would choose her. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the desert sky. Taza's face was unreadable, his jaw tight, his eyes dark as midnight. He looked at his people, then at Mary. For a long time, silence reigned. At last he spoke. His voice was steady, but each word struck like a drum. She saved me when death had me. She touched my wounds when no other would. She risked her life for mine. If this is weakness, then I choose it. If this is dishonor, then I claim it. Gasps rose from the circle. Some shouted in anger, others in disbelief. But no one dared challenge him. He was still Taza, still their fiercest warrior, and his word was law. Mary's eyes filled with tears. In that moment, she understood what his choice meant. He had not chosen between tribe and prisoner. He had chosen between the life expected of him and the life his heart demanded. When the soldiers arrived at dawn, they found the camp already moved, vanished into the desert like smoke. Mary was not among them. She had chosen to stay, not as a captive, but as something far more dangerous. Together, she and Taza walked into an uncertain future, bound by scars, by silence, and by a love that defied every law of the world they knew. It was a choice that left the tribe speechless, the soldiers bewildered, and Mary forever changed. And though the desert winds carried away their footprints, the story of the white nurse and the fiercest Apache lived on, whispered around fires, carried by the stars, eternal as the desert itself.